All right, folks, we are live. So, yeah, I think we're just about ready. We'll give Francisco a second here as he's connecting. Okay, looks like he's going to have to reconnect. We'll give him another moment. Wonder what happened there. Okay, I think I'm just going to get started with my little bit here, and then maybe we can hop into speaker intros right after that, and then as Francisco is joining, just so we get things kind of rolling, and then as he comes in, we can figure out what to do there. Sound good? All right. So, hey, everyone. Welcome. My name is Reeth. I'm one of the organizers for Startup Boston Week. So we're super excited to have everyone. We have a really great panel set up for you guys today. So let me actually just show you what else is going on just in case. So currently, this is, okay, this is a little bit wrong, but we have the correct panel at the end of the second one. So this is Dream Team, how to structure a successful engineering team. The other panel that's going on right now is the science of scale. So if you folks in the audience, the 70 of you that are watching, are looking for the science of scale, this is not that. Please use the agenda button up top, and you can then join the lobby for science of scale. But we actually have, this is Dream Team. So I'm going to stop presenting there. So just a couple other notes. We love questions, so please throw questions in the Q&A section over on the right. Francisco, our moderator, who has just connected, is going to be monitoring the Q&A section, and then we'll do a Q&A session at the end, or maybe interspersed, depending on the question. And he'll be able to monitor that and take a look. So please post questions. And then again, so you probably have heard about this already, but we have an awesome social media competition floating around. So please listen to what the panelists are saying and get a great quote, very Twitterable, and grab that, post it on Twitter or Facebook or any social media platform, and tag hashtag SBW2021. And that way you'll be able to enter a raffle for one of five $100 gift cards that is for a Black-owned Boston business. So that's pretty much it for me. So it looks like Francisco's having some intermittent internet issues, so I'll probably just stay on for a little bit longer. But why don't we just get started with some speaker intros? Dan, do you want to kick us off there?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I am Dan Cadigan. I'm currently VP of Engineering at 3Play Media, which is an accessibility and closed captioning company in the North End. I previously was one of the first three on the engineering team at Indigo Agriculture, which is an agriculture technology startup in Boston, Charlestown specifically. My responsibilities there were helping the team scale from 3 to 350 over the course of about 3 years. So pretty crazy growth there. And then in my spare time, I'm an open source author, and I love contributing to open source projects.
Sweet. Russell, you want to take it from there?
Sure. Right now, I'm the Associate Director of Engineering over at Chewy. I'm responsible for the content platforms powering Chewy.com and our native mobile apps, along with PetMD and Chewy, which are the properties that Chewy owns. Prior to this, I worked at EasyCater, where I was Director of Engineering. Prior to that, I worked at Amazon, and actually spent most of my career in startups, the most notable being JumpTap, which eventually got bought by Mono Media, where I started as an individual contributor. And by the time I left, 10 years later, I was the longest tenured employee and the VP of Engineering. And after that, I was the CTO at MGEMI.
Amazing. Colleen.
Hi, yeah, I'm Colleen Tarton. I'm Director of Engineering at Starburst Data. I joined right before our B round, and we got our C round in January. I think I was employee 80 something, and now we're over 300. We're in the seaport, or we will be in the seaport soon. And yeah, I help run we're building our managed services product, but we are a data and analytics company that does analytics anywhere. So been a data nerd for a really long time. I actually ran data at EasyCater, and Russ and I worked together there. So it's good to see him. So we'll have some inside jokes. So,
Right. Yeah. It's always great when panelists know each other. And congratulations on the funding round as well. Lata, you want to take it from there?
Sure. I'm Lata Ahuja. I recently started CarGurus. I'm the Senior Director of Engineering. I previously was at Wonder as a startup in Boston. I was the VP of Engineering there, and I've had a variety of leadership roles at different companies. Happy to be in this panel.
Nice. Amazing. Okay, so I think we're going to kick things off with a poll. And so the first poll is, what is your role? And so for the audience members, we'd love to just know, what your role is. So please feel free in the poll section to your right, what you are working as. So we have a sense of our audience. We're also going to post a couple other polls that are going on in between. So we just get a better sense of who's watching. But okay, so it looks like, unfortunately, Francisco's just having internet issues. So I think I'm going to step in as moderator until he comes back. So the first question here is, there's so many types of engineers out there. It can be really hard to understand the landscape, especially if you're a non-technical founder. And what we're trying to understand is, what kinds of engineers are there at various company sizes? What do they specialize in? And like, what do you need added depending on like the role, or depending on the company stage that you're at? So let's start with Colleen.
Sure. Yeah, I definitely think there's a direct relationship between company age or size or stage, or however you want to think about it, and the specialization of engineers. Because earlier on, you want to hire athletes, right? Like folks who can play multiple sports. They're not specialized in one sport. And folks who are good at solving problems across the spectrum of technologies. And so someone who's full stack as opposed to a pure front end, for example. Okay. And you don't typically need a data scientist from the get-go unless you're building a data science product. But, obviously I'm going to come at it from a data perspective, that you do want to think how data plays into your company in an early phase, and how data-driven do you want to be should indicate that maybe you want somebody who also can do some data work. But yeah, the rule of thumb that I go by is that you want the best engineers you can afford, who are like have the broadest scope as well as that depth. So,
right.
Hire the best engineer.
Yeah, of course. So Russell, do you want to pick it up from there? What other kinds of engineers? So we've heard full stack and data science. What other kind of roles might your company need? Sure.
So there's typically the front end versus back end. So as you grow, you'd want someone who can really specialize and build out a customer-friendly, really tailored high-end experience. So you get a front end engineer who really specializes, had depth there. Back end, a similar type of thing, if you're building out APIs or just building out the aspect of your core services. You might want an SRE who helps you with your infrastructure, a SysOps engineer, quality engineer, machine learning engineer. Really, as you grow, there will be different specialties. But we sort of look at engineers like on the T scale, right? What's the width and depth of them on any given topic, right? And so, at the beginning, you probably want a lot more width than depth, or if you can really find one or two who have both. But as you grow, you might change what you look for on that T scale.
Right. Okay. So we've heard SRE, infra, full stack and front end at this point in data science. Lata, do you have any other kind of roles or potential roles that you might need to fill?
Well, I think Colleen and Russell did a good job. But as the company grows, depending on the data needs, nowadays there's a new specialty called data engineering. And
yes,
hiring for data engineers may be necessary, not for all companies, but it depends on how much data is coming in or streaming in. That's the other kind of skill that's more relevant these days.
Right. Yeah. And we had a whole AI panel yesterday where one of the full questions was how much of the process of ML is really data engineering versus actually building a model. And probably the answer is 90%, or like a lot of it is just that data engineering piece. So absolutely, you're right. Dan, do you want to kind of fill in any other roles that we might potentially need at a startup?
I think they might have nailed all the roles so far. I will say that I'm seeing this pattern emerge where data engineering is even kind of come something that you look at in two different ways. One is a traditional data engineer that's responsible for building a lot of software to move data around. And now there's this emerging analytics engineer that is more skilled in kind of using like newer tools that will take data and move it around. So they're really wiring systems together and also have decent SQL and analytical skills. So it's kind of a blend between a BI analyst and a data engineer. Is something that I've seen honestly only over the last year or two.
I see. Okay. So actually plumbing that data around and being able to use these higher leverage even tools to kind of move data around, right?
Yeah, I'm sure Colleen has some thoughts on that too.
Hello.
There's so many thoughts on that. No, I actually wrote.
Okay, Francisco, are you in?
Oh.
Yes, it seems like I'm in. Can you guys hear me all right?
Oh, so sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, but we just want to maybe do the moderator transition if Francisco is good. So Francisco, I've asked the first question. Basically, we've got like a great landscape of full stack, front end, back end, data science, infra, all sorts of different engineering roles. And Colleen's just kind of filling in a little bit more color on the data engineering aspect of things. So I'm going to allow you to pick up on the next question after Colleen, but I'm just going to mute myself and kind of chill here for a little bit just in case.
Okay, sounds good. Well, before you take over, Colleen, to finish answering their question, I'm really sorry about the technical difficulties. I'm glad you all got started and you all got the ball rolling, but why don't we continue?
All right. Welcome back, Francisco.
Thank you.
I think that, regardless of whether you call it an analytics engineer or a broad data engineer, I've, in my mind, a really good analytics engineer and a senior data engineer, there's so much overlap in the Venn diagram of those two roles that, I've always said hire a senior data engineer before you hire a data scientist or an analyst, because a lot of this is based on SQL or Python, right? And a good data engineer will be able to use all of those tools and really understand how to build out a data architecture and ecosystem at your company.
Cool.
Oh, I think you're muted, Francisco.
I promise I do about one of these calls a week with my team. I do remote work. Cool. Would anyone else like to add to this particular question about the different types of engineers out there? Cool. Well, we can move on to the next question. So what engineering roles should be hiring for, and how specialized should engineers be at different stages? For example, pre-seed, seed, Series A, etc. Why don't we start with Lata?
So I think we covered a little bit of this. That is, earlier we want to hire generalists and people who have, I think Russell spoke to it, based on a T-shape. That is, they have a breadth of experience. And then as the company, matures, then you sort of bring in specialists and augment the skills that are needed based on where the company is heading.
That makes a lot of sense. Dan, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I don't think this is actually part of the question, but I think it's important to mention that early on, there's folks that have all these different skill sets, and you want kind of a jack of all trades at the beginning of your company so that you don't need 3 people to do, all of the work when you're being nimble. I think it's super important that you hire senior early on. A jack of all trades that's 2 years out of college and hasn't seen what can happen if you architect things the wrong way can do more damage than you as a non-technical person could ever imagine. That first person is really setting the foundation for the next 5 to 10 years of your startup. So getting it done right the first time is very important. So hire senior early, and then junior as you're able to support those people.
Those senior people you hire aren't just putting the technical foundation in, they're also putting the cultural foundation in. So really think hard about who you hire and what values they have, and you share those values with them, and that's what they're going to embody and embed into the company's DNA.
That's a great
Absolutely.
point.
Yeah. Creating the foundation of, setting the foundation of your application, your system is so important. As Dan said, we've heard many horror stories of companies that have to go through a whole rewrite, and that has its own problems. And the same with culture. Culture is huge. Like, you're hiring people that you're going to work for an extended period of time. They can set the team morale, the speed, and a lot of things. So those are great answers. So moving on. So how do you build an efficient hiring pipeline? It's, there's a lot of competition out there for technical background. A lot of people are hiring. So, where do you source your engineers? Should you rely on your team's network or hire a recruiting firm? Why don't we go with Russell?
So my philosophy when I was at Gemini was hire or build a pipeline, right? You want the funnel to be as large as you can, right? Any source that can provide you candidates is worthwhile to invest in, right? Because you're going to spend most of your time hiring anyway. If you can optimize that, then you get that pipeline flowing, then you're in good shape. And Gemini, we hired out a team of 8 by the time I left, and we used 3 or 4 different agencies. We used referrals. We also hired someone internally. I mean, for me, the pipeline is important, but then how you run it through, right? You're trying to understand not only how they match culturally, but technical competency wise. You want them to have an understanding of your philosophies as a company, as a manager, but also what makes them tick. Is there curiosity and drive there? Are they going to add value to it? Are they going to be a builder of your culture, or are they going to take away from it? And is it representative of the customers that you're building against, right? Are you building a pro culture, or are you building a inclusive, empathetic culture that represents a difference of opinions and backgrounds? So for me, you refine it, but once you put a process in that you can try to drive out implicit bias and is repeatable, that you do not necessarily need to be a part of it, but it's just a machine that kind of cranks through and continues to hire as you hire and grow as a company.
That makes a lot of sense. Would anyone else like to add anything?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with what Russ said. And I think for me, I rely on everyone to source, right? Like, everyone should be sourcing. We should all be, especially when you're in a hyper growth phase, like, sourcing is a huge portion of what people do. And, you have to go to recruiting events and post about your jobs and all the different social media sites, and really just get the word out that you're looking. Because especially if you're a small company, not everyone's going to have heard of you. So you have to really get out there and provide content so that people can find you. And then when recruiters do find people, there'll be things for them to look at too. So I think having a good story for even that phase that you're having people entering the funnel, like, that's a really important piece of it too.
The story is a must right now. I mean, there are people like Chewy, Google, Facebook, Amazon here in Boston hiring thousands of engineers, right? And so if you don't stand out and provide a story and a good mission, then people are just gonna, people are gonna pay more. You just have to anticipate that. So you have to have something compelling, and people do not always go for the most money. They look for something that's interesting to them, because that's where they're gonna spend the majority of their time.
Absolutely. Great points. You guys, go ahead, Dan.
I just have one thing to add there. I think that, up until probably 5 years or so, I feel like you could have gotten by just using LinkedIn, or, gotten by much more easily with just using LinkedIn to recruit and internal referrals. But people are all over the place now. There's so many different places where engineers are hanging out, or developers in general. So you need to be on, Slack, Discord, Hacker News, Who's Hiring, Reddit, subreddits. There's all these different places that people are congregating now. And if you're just kind of hanging out on LinkedIn, then you're missing out on so many of these avenues where there's a lot of eyeballs. So definitely spread around. Don't have one strategy, use many different strategies.
Yeah, I stalk people on Git. I think it's worthwhile pointing out that now that everyone's more remote friendly, like you're no longer, forced to just consider quote people who are in commuting distance of Boston, and so that really adds a lot of breadth to your search, which is exciting, but it's also daunting because that means everyone's doing that. So yeah, just like Dan said, you have to look at all the different sources.
And it also makes it harder in some ways too, because you're entering markets that you don't have an understanding of, the same way that we have an understanding of the Boston market. Like Chewy entered Seattle, and we struggled for the first 6 months as we just, there's I think 5,000 openings right now in Seattle, and we really struggled with the comp, our messaging, interview cadence. Like there's just a number of things that we just couldn't get right until we iterated on it and really grew.
Yeah, fantastic points. You guys kind of answered 2 questions in one there. So that's pretty good. So I'd like to jump into the next thing. So hiring is hard. There's a lot of competition out there. You always need to be hiring, maintain that healthy pipeline, as you guys said. But on the same note, when should founders, co-founders, or engineering leaders consider outsourcing engineering work outside instead of doing it in-house?
So what I would say on that is you're always going to want someone in-house, right? I think the big inflection point is at the beginning. Do you spend the time hiring, or are you in such a rush to get to market that hiring an outsourced partner to get up and running, knowing that you probably will throw it away as their incentives are to do this work and then move on, right? I think that, knowing that you're going to have to rewrite it. Later on, if you have an engineering team that is mature, that has experience, I think you can augment your team with an outside team, but I don't think I would ever trust, unless I knew I was going to throw it away, completely an outsourced partner and be like, just go build something for me. Because one, you don't, if you're doing that and you're not a technical founder anyway, you're not going to understand it. You don't know where they cut corners. You don't know the quality of it. Probably don't know how to operationalize it and maintain it. And then you're going to bring someone else in who's going to have a strong set of opinions, and you're going to probably zig and zag in ways that you don't want to. I've had more experience augmenting teams than I have with just completely outsourcing.
So I agree with Russell. I think the staff augmentation model works much better, especially when the team is a little more mature, because there are a lot of hidden costs and there's a lot of time and energy that goes into making the outsourcing effort successful.
That makes a lot of sense. Outsourcing doesn't come for free. It's very expensive and not just the monetary value. Would you consider outsourcing other aspects of the engineering process? For example, perhaps QA over developing a feature, maybe outsourcing. Actually, I'll stop there.
I will, I've used great outsourcing teams. I've had some that didn't work so well, but I think the best time to consider outsourcing, like my fellow panelists have said, is definitely more in a staff aug model, because you definitely need, with someone who's not an employee, you need to have an incredibly clear and well-defined work stream that's technical, but also that doesn't require specific business knowledge, because that's exactly what this person won't have, right? So the augmentation model is great because it allows you to staff up a project with someone who does have the business knowledge, and then outsource all of the specific tasks to someone who doesn't. So QA is a good example where if the person knows how it's supposed to work, they don't need to know why it doesn't work. They just know that it doesn't, right? But yeah, once you start bringing in business knowledge, then you're literally just throwing away brain power. So,
I mean, you're, as a founder or a startup, right? You're hiring people who believe in the mission, who are going to do as much as they can to push you forward and try to make you viable and something that grows and it becomes something, right? And so I think aligning incentives is really important, and making sure that the people that you do bring on to work on your product are aligned with you and believe in your mission is really important. And when you're going with staff augmentation, if you just completely, outsource it, and you completely outsource it, your incentives no longer aligned, right? The people are not going to be as invested. They're not going to write the documentation to the level that you might expect, right? And in some ways, they're not managed to the same level that you would do with either someone internal or someone you did with staff augmentation. So it's really risky to me.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned, Russell, aligning incentives, like making sure you hire people that align with your mission and with your values. And I think that takes us to our next question on engineering retention. So we've talked about hiring amazing engineers. You hire the right people. What are some considerations to have to make sure that you retain those engineers? Why don't you start, Russell?
Sure. So for me, one, people, I tell my teams all the time, right? They've entrusted me with their career for a limited amount of time, right? Their career is going to be, let's say, 30, 40 years, right? Or 25, whatever it is, right? And they're entrusting me. And so treating them with respect, providing them information, unblocking them, providing them a path to grow, whether it's skill-wise, money-wise, title-wise, is all very important, right? So I value transparency, building a culture that is empathetic and inclusive, where they feel included and understand why we're doing things. These are the things that I try to put in place with mechanisms on my team, right? So that, I think, is the type of things that work. But sometimes people outgrow you, sometimes you outgrow them. It's really just trying to be open and honest and making sure that you each are aligned and understand what you want out of the time together and try to provide it. And sometimes if you can't provide it on your own team, being open and honest and being like, all right, I work at a larger company now, like, all right, maybe you're interested in what I'm doing. The content platform isn't as interesting anymore. Why don't we state your intellectual curiosity on mobile apps or, the storefront side? I'd much rather keep a talented engineer than see them leave the company.
Yeah, I think that Russ nailed the hows. I think it's also equally important the what, like what they'll be working on. So I think that engineers want to work on challenging things. I had pretty good retention while I was at Indigo, but the few people that I did leave just ended up on a project that wasn't that technically challenging. And I feel like when people aren't scratching that technical itch, they get a little loose in the socket. So I think making sure to put good, challenging problems in front of them is really important. And then having a culture where everybody's just always learning, making sure that, as you scale up and you have multiple teams, that the teams are distributing kind of knowledge to each other and making it kind of an academic feeling is also super important. Because most of the people that we're talking about there right now are folks that are earlier on in their career, and there's money and there's other perks, but for the most part, they're just trying to level up their skills, to try to keep on getting better.
Yeah, people want feel that they're a part of something and have good relationship with the people that they work with. Those, I think, are the top two reasons why people leave. Right? It's usually not money or title. So just keeping those communication lines open. At EasyCater and now at Chewy, we used a tool called 15.5, which was a nice communication tool that allowed you to have this dialogue going on through the week, and allowed you to structure one-on-one. So basically at the end of the week, the employee would write a pulse check, basically answer 2 questions. What are you proud of this week? How are you feeling? 3 questions. And what challenges are you facing? Right? And then it allowed you also to create a one-on-one agenda. So you can have these conversations that are well-structured, and you're not coming in surprised. And so if something comes up and you see it, you can act on it much, much quicker. And then you have a running dialogue of conversations. And it was really effective. And it's a really effective tool for me as a manager and nipping things in the butt. And I've had really good success with retention, both at EasyCater and here at Chewy.
Yeah, I think one thing, when I think about founding engineers or early hires, one thing that I'm always cautious of is they can start to feel marginalized when their depth of knowledge is now a smaller percentage of the overall knowledge base, and they're so specialized And early on, they knew everything, but now your product has gotten so big, or your product suite has gotten so big that nobody can know everything, right? So you really have to look for opportunities to develop them in other ways. And things like giving them architectural roles on new products or design or moving into different teams is great. And then also I always think about thought leadership, right? Like get people out there producing content about what they've built, because they have this great career at this point and they've been, they've seen all the different stages of the company. So you want to help them understand where they want to go in their career. And often that can help them get there too.
Validation is really important.
Yeah.
Kudos and validation. It's a good call out.
Right, and keeping them engaged, and therefore having, as the company grows and matures, having a career path that is visible to them and they can relate to and work towards, I think is also very helpful.
Absolutely.
Everyone probably want to works for all of us right now because we all sound amazing.
You all sound amazing. I am I'm having trouble keeping up with the Q&A because I want to listen to your answers, but the Q&A can hold a little longer. I promise to everyone who's asked questions that we're gonna get to you.
Francisco, one note about what Lata just said. I think that's super duper important. As companies start scaling, I think as you go from a few engineers to, let's say, like a dozen on the team, you start getting a lot of these questions around, hey, my title now is software engineer. What's it mean to be a senior software engineer? Or I'm a senior software engineer. Like, is there another role for me? Like, is it only senior software and architect? Am I going to be in this role forever? So yeah, I think it's really important to keep a pulse on that as your company grows, because people are going to start talking about it. And if you're not having an open dialogue with them, going back to Russ's transparency topic, you need to make sure that conversation is happening, because people will get a little stir crazy if they have a lot of uncertainty. So yeah, just making sure that that's all detailed and that people feel comfortable with where they're at. Very important.
I would advocate one of the first things you do as an engineering leader, if you came into a startup, once you get a little bit of breathing time, is to actually build a competency model, right? There's plenty of examples out there, but it's just goes back to the transparency piece. Set the expectations of what the roles are, what the expectations are, and then you're able to have a sit-down conversation on some cadence and be like, look, here are the things that you're meeting. Here's what you need to do. Let's talk about the opportunities to get you there and what skills we need to develop and how to do it. And then we'll give you that promotion.
Russ, just so when you talk about a competency model, how would that differ from a career ladder, or are they one and the same?
Oh, sorry, one and the same. Sorry, different language from different companies.
Yeah, I'll get it. Just wanted to make sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, you guys already start hitting, hinting to our next sort of topic here. So, you have a small company, it starts growing, your engineering team starts growing, other teams start growing. And this poses some challenges. Like when you're a very small company, maybe pre-seed or seed, you may have a small team of like 5 people, or 6 or 10, even 10. As a founder, you might find yourself managing sort of some of your team members. But as the company grows, it doesn't scale. It doesn't make sense for you to manage. So eventually you're going to have to hire some engineering leaders. You guys have mentioned engineering leaders. And just managers, people managers, not just only on the tech side. So what is the role of management on an engineering team? When do you start introducing a hierarchy into the engineering organization? Start with Lata.
I think it varies in every company, but I think it depends on when. There are many factors. It's like, when is the founder or the CTO willing to relinquish control? There's that aspect. It's also when the company is ready to slightly grow and mature. And I feel like it also depends on whether the company has an understanding of what they're looking for, right? So I feel like I go through a lot of interviews where I feel like the company is learning about what they want from the personal role, which is great, but it'd be better if they actually know what they're looking for before they interview. And it happens sometimes, right? So I feel like they have to go through a lot of internal discussions to know whether they're ready and whether they want to. A lot of companies do it when they want to scale, when they want to hire, and they want somebody who's done the role before, has been responsible for the execution part before, come in and help the company so that the founding members or the CTO can focus on something else.
Yeah, I think another way to say that, Lata, I think you nailed it. I think when the leader, the existing leader, that's team has gotten too large for them to handle themselves, when they start dropping some of their responsibilities or are unable to do all of them that they're uniquely positioned to handle, like stuff only the CTO could do, like, meeting with customers, et cetera. When they're dropping those responsibilities, I think that they need to hire somebody to take over the things that aren't something that they're uniquely able to tackle.
Yeah, there's definitely that inflection point where, the CTO starts dropping team responsibilities so they can handle those CTO only responsibilities. And then, someone more senior with leadership capabilities on the team steps up, but then they're like, I can't do this and write code. And, you start seeing those holes in process, in actual execution. And, you start to be like, hey, we could go faster if somebody was like managing this middle level. And it's one of those things, like, once you see it, you're like, oh, I can't unsee that. Yeah.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. And I see here like sort of like a chicken and egg problem. So, your company is growing really fast and your team has outgrown you, let's say as the CTO or the technical co-founder. Hiring engineers is very different than hiring engineering leaders because the skill set that you're looking for is not as hard. It's not just hard skills. Can you build this? It's beyond that. Can you manage people, which is less tangible? So how do you evaluate whether a head of engineering or an engineering leader is a good fit for your company? Colleen.
I think to start, you have to be incredibly clear about the expectations that you have for the role. Like, are you expecting this to be a functional manager who's also writing code 50% of the time? Because then you don't want to hire, a VP or director probably, but maybe you do. But like, what do you picture them doing day to day, right? Are they focusing on people management and product development execution? Are they leading one team, several teams? Are they approving PRs? Are they testing the product? Like, be very, very clear about what you plan on them doing, at least for the first few months, because God knows things pivot, right? Mm-hmm. But like, make sure that you understand what you're looking for specifically, and then put that in your job description and be very clear with your recruiters that this is what I'm looking for. These are my, deal breakers. This is my ideal candidate. And then, just start sourcing. Often, like you said, there's a lot of intangibles in there, but try to make them tangible. Like, if you're like, I want someone who's really authentic, right? Like, go Google questions that test authenticity, right? Like, if you want someone who's got a lot of grit, like, start talking to them about things that you think will allow them to showcase their grit, right? And so look at the values that you want and then look for alignment in those values through the questions that you're talking to them about.
It's funny how you asked the question, right? Like, when I interviewed as an individual contributor, right, I usually came home and my wife would ask me, how did it go? I usually had a pretty good idea, right? I got problems and whether I solved them well and had a good dialogue, but then when I interviewed as a manager or as a people leader and I come home, I'd be like, I have no idea. I don't know if my management philosophies, their management philosophies, it is really hard. I think when I hire people leaders, I'm looking for people who, have defined management systems in place, right? They understand how they want to develop career plans. They understand how they want to improve operational excellence. They've thought through and know how they want to hire people, and they are not reactive. They're always looking for ways to improve the team and not in a punitive way, right? Anything that happens, right? They're pushing the team to be aggressive to a certain level, right? But it can understand risk. But when something goes wrong, they're always looking for ways to improve things, both short-term and long-term. And I think those are some key aspects of it. And just echoing on what Colleen said, culture is vitally important because they are the the people that your engineers are going to look up to as an example of what you want your company to be.
I think one thing to add there, kind of segueing from the culture comment, is that you should always be looking within your organization to see if there's somebody that's ready to jump into that position too. Because, bringing somebody in at a level that's above IC, they come in a position of power, and there's, well, I guess power is not the right word, but they come in with a lot of weight, and hiring the wrong person in there can destabilize things quite a bit if you do it wrong. So if there's somebody that's maybe even not 100% ready, but ready to kind of like tackle the problem head on, hiring from within, it's a pretty safe bet as to whether, they're going to be a good kind of culture fit in that new role, that new heightened role. So it's always something that you should kind of look at as an option.
Fantastic. Yeah, those are really good answers. And I think one point you bring then is the hiring from within. And I think one of our questions from our Q&A hit on that. So I'd like to publish that question. So the question is by Jordan Pilot. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. But it's, how do you deal with graduation from informal titles to formal? Hierarchical titles within an engineering team used to the former from an earlier stage of the company. In other words, how do you impose a hierarchy upon a team of engineers used to egalitarianism? So that goes hand in hand with what you were talking about of hiring from within. And I think it's very important to understand, like, how can you deal with the hierarchy once you start maybe promoting someone from being just an individual contributor to now being a manager or some sort of leader. So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think this might have a different skew on how I was answering the last question. I think this is really, early on in companies, you don't say I'm a staff software engineer as employee number one at a startup, right? It's I'm the engineer, right?
Yeah.
And eventually, as you grow, there becomes a pretty clear distinction between somebody that's a few years out of college and somebody that has 10 to 15 years of experience. So I think, these things are always going to be different based on the individuals that you have. It's just one of those things in management. You just have to be listening to folks, and you'll kind of get the feeling when people start kind of like grumbling and talking about, titles a little bit more when they never talked about it before. So I think as far as timing, listen to your folks. But the process it's pretty standard. You need to look at everybody, their contributions, how they're performing, how others feel they're performing. And then you need to kind of come up with a leveling system and eventually slot folks into levels. I don't know if anybody else on the panel has any ideas how they've done it.
I would try to do levels right from the beginning. I'd much rather do that than give someone the title ninja. I mean, I wouldn't go around, but in the offer letter, there's a title, right? So you might as well start, and you're not inventing the wheel here, right? There's thousands upon thousands of, hierarchies to use, and just grab one, even if it's just like engineer, senior engineer, principal engineer, right? And just slot people in. And I mean, you're probably gonna have to adjust things anyway over time, right? The early people have low salaries because they're taking more equity, and you don't have as much money, and then as you get more funding, there's some calibration that happens at some point anyway, but I would try to define it early on.
Yeah, I think the times when I find you have to add in titles is when people start adding their own titles on LinkedIn and they start calling themselves senior. And then you start to sometimes see disparities, and you think, oh, that person thinks they're senior and they might not be, or they're not quite there. And so that's when you really need to write down very clearly what the career ladder is and what is the expectation of each level, and then slotting people in and just having those conversations as early as possible so people can get used to the idea before you really officially make the titles. I think that has, in my experience, worked well. So.
Awesome. That makes a lot of sense. Go ahead, Dan.
I was just going to say, I think it's important, though, if you are going to do titles right from the beginning, which I think it's like, either way would work fine, you have to be careful not to inflate titles from the get-go, because if you call somebody the head of engineering as developer number one, and you know that they're only going to be the head of engineering until you hire a head of engineering, right? Because realistically, with 3 years of experience, they're not going to be the person that leads you for 2, 3, 4 years if you're lucky enough to survive that long.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, you just need to be realistic if you're going to give out titles, because it's a really hard conversation to take your head of engineering and have to have the discussion that, actually we're going to change that to whatever the realistic role would have been.
I mean, I would argue you're giving a title to the CEO, the CFO, you give founders to everybody under the sun, that you should also give titles to software engineers.
Totally. And one thing, Dan, I think that's an important point, because that giving a title without thinking about it very well is not only detrimental to the company, but could also be detrimental to the engineer themselves. Like, they might feel like they are a head of engineering when they didn't gain the experience of being a head of engineering at your company. So when looking for a job elsewhere, that can present a problem. If they're not, like, they might apply for head of engineering position, expect a head of engineering salary, when they're in fact were not even exercising the role of head of engineering at your company. So that's an amazing point. We have another question that I think it's relevant here from Jordan as well. So as the company is growing, it's growing very fast, you need to make changes to your organization. Either you're hiring leaders, or you promoting people from inside to be leaders. So there's gonna be a lot of restructuring in your organization, and depending on the size of your organization, that might be met with some resistance, because not everyone likes change and everyone treats change differently. What are some techniques that can be used to deal with such resistances?
So I can speak to that. I'll go first. So I think it is fairly common in high growth companies for, constant change. By example, when I was at Carbon Black and we were growing, we changed a lot, we grew a lot in a very short period of time. We did have a lot of changes. The one thing we did do to alleviate any kind of concern, we would actually talk to the people and see what their concerns was, because we would recruit them for different teams, we'd move them around. But we always did it with a conversation, so they were not surprised. They had input into, the change, and I feel like that worked really well for us.
Yeah, I've been through something similar where there was an acquisition and some of the titles disappeared and people got re-leveled as part of that. And it can be really challenging because people, it's their title, they identify with it. And so having that honest conversation and pointing to other people in the same situation and being like, you are at the same level as this other amazing person and they are in a similar situation. So just know that it's not a reflection on you personally, and this is how the new company works and that kind of thing. So acquisitions can be tough because there's so much change, and then on top of that, your titles are changing. So just being open and honest about it, and then being, again, very clear about what each level means. So.
There's a lot of emotion when you make a change, right? And so people want to know how it's going to impact them, right? You might be introducing a new manager, and so people are like, well, this manager knew all about my career development and where I was going and all the different aspects of it. Now I got to start over with this new manager. Will they even know any of that? So there's some groundwork that you need to do. You obviously also don't want to surprise people. They develop relationships with other team members. They're concerned with that. And so, as others have said, transparency, explaining the why that you're doing it, walking through, and just really providing the emotional support that people need to accept and understand and handle the change. Some people are great at it, some are not. And so, adjusting your approach to each individual member too, as well.
I think a lot of good points here. I guess the only extra thing that I would add is that, when you grow, I think it's super important that you have a transparent and open relationship with all your people from the beginning, but especially in times where you're reorging or shuffling, or whatever term you use to make it sound less scary. I think it's important that you either tell folks up front that something's coming, or you leave breadcrumbs so that it's not a complete surprise. Because, honestly, just grabbing the sheet and like pulling it out and everybody just being like, oh my God, everything's different today is the worst thing you can do. If you let people know that something's coming, you don't give them all the details so that like the information you give them is wrong, right? But you give them enough information that you're 100% confident about, then they'll thank you. They'll it can actually be a good thing. It doesn't have to be this like scary, oh my God, do I have a job? It's just hey, we've grown up to another level again where our structures that we have today don't support the headcount that we're going to have. So here's the types of changes. Here's why we need to make them, and here's where you're going to end up. And if as long as the story makes sense, engineers are they're very logical people. So as long as everything lines up to their mental model, then typically I've found that it's a non-event. It's part of the business of being at a hyper-growth company.
Yeah, I think like you all mentioned transparency and communication, but depending on the stage of the company, like transparency means different things. Like an acquisition might be confidential until it goes through. How could you prepare your team for this without telling them that your company is going through an acquisition? Any ideas?
I mean, I would never hint at it, but
Yeah.
There are ways of like, just being like, hey, don't forget, change is inevitable. Not blasé or obvious about it. I don't know. I mean, I think especially in startup life, I don't think people expect it to be smooth sailing 24/7, right? Like the older a company gets and the larger and more mature, like then yes, you expect some degree of stability. But in a startup world, I feel like you have to expect change.
Yeah, in the startup world, when you were in the office, you would see these random people who would be in the main conference room often, and you'd be like, wait, what's going on? Like, why are the founders always in this meeting with the CTO, and they're drawing up our architecture diagrams, these random people? Like, what's going on over there? You sort of get some of the clues. It's a little harder now, but
I don't calendar stop people, Russ.
No. Only yours,
it's interesting.
Indicator.
So I think some of the change that we're talking about, just a normal reorg as the company grows, I think people can think are scary. I think most people that get involved with startups are hoping for one of two liquidity events, an acquisition being one and going public's the other. So I think that type of like scary change is like kind of what people are hoping for. So like, yeah, it's going to be a lot bumpier than a reorg that you can message around, but it's kind of the thing everyone was hoping would happen. So I think folks are down to deal with a little bit more uncertainty in that situation.
Yeah, but if you have a reputation of being like trustworthy and transparent with your folks, they have no reason not to trust you. And I mean, you can be honest when it happens, be like, I really hated keeping this from you, but I had to for certain reasons. And people typically do understand that. Hopefully they're mature enough.
Yeah, awesome. So it sounds like, it goes hand in hand with trust, culture, and just the expectations that that are set when you're hiring someone or when they join the startup. So amazing answer to everyone. All right, so I think we have a couple of questions left, but I feel like we've touched on all of them. So we only have like 6 minutes left. So why don't we allow the audience to pose any other questions that they may have?
Sorry, I disappeared. I had no idea what happened.
Oh, good. So we've gone through our program, and now we're allowing our audience to ask any questions they may have. Give them a couple of minutes. If there are any questions, then we can call it.
So in the Q&A here, there was one question from someone I actually used to work with about how do you respond to an engineer you're trying to hire who gets a much bigger comp and equity offer from a FANG company? It's a really good question, and it's a hard one to answer. It's right now that is very difficult as some of those FANGs can double the salary in some ways when you include equity. Really, I think it comes down to mission, right? I think if you have a compelling mission that really resonates with that candidate, you might be able to entice them, but it is very difficult. I would stay positive. when you're pitching it and not talk about the things that could possibly go wrong in a FANG. I mean, a FANG experience is amazing. I enjoyed my 2 years at one of them. I learned a lot, but there's definitely differences when you work for a startup and the relationships that you build compared to working for a FANG. And not everyone is built for startup, and not everyone's built for FANG. And just trying to figure out what the person's motivations are, I think, is the most important, and continue to be transparent with them about what you're looking for and what you can offer.
Yeah, I think any of us could also work at a FANG, and I'm choosing to work where I work because I love the startup life, and I really truly believe in Starburst's mission. And so I think if you have that passion, you can be honest about it. And if somebody's like, "That's nice, but you're not paying me $1 billion a year," then you're right. I can't afford that, but I wish you all the best of luck, and let's stay in touch, right? Like, you just have to be honest at that stage that maybe it's not what they're looking for. Completely agree, Russ.
I think the only times I feel like I think mission is an absolute must, right? Like, if people are not looking for a mission, they'll be fine with working for a Facebook or a company where they might have to kind of look the other way. But yeah, I think leaning on the mission is important. And then also, I think if you need to pitch a startup as kind of training wheels for starting your own company many times, right? Because a lot of the folks that don't want to go to FANG want to learn as much as they can so that they can one day start their own company. And going to a FANG company, in my opinion, is a really bad way to learn about how to start a company. You might go and specialize in a really obscure part of Android, right? And unless your company is about that really obscure part of Android, which it's probably not, you'd learn a lot more by going to a smaller company where you're making less money, but you're getting a graduate level education in, how to scale a company, what sorts of things to do at which time periods, what to look out for, and you become way better equipped to start your own company. So I think that's something I've leaned on in the past too.
Absolutely. And that undergrad or grad happens all in a very short amount of time that otherwise will take much longer to learn all those things. Cool. Well, I don't see any more questions or messages. I think our panelists, you guys have done an amazing job. Fantastic answers. I myself leave out of here with a lot of new insight, and I appreciate all of the insights you guys shared. Sorry for the little hiccup at the very beginning. Thanks to Reed for taking over and having a smooth transition. And why don't we have the smooth transition again? And Reed, why don't you take over?
Yeah. Did we get to all the questions in the chat? Because I'm seeing a couple more, like something about a CTO for equity versus hiring an engineering lead. Some of those kind of questions. Did we answer that already?
We did not. I was looking at the Q&A and not at all these questions that we have here. Oh my.
Oh yeah. So
Well,
I think yeah.
We
can just answer this one. I think we have about 2 minutes left. Maybe this is enough for this particular question. But yeah, so non-technical founder, currently outsourcing app dev, and wanted to discuss the advantages and pitfalls of hiring a CTO for the equity versus hiring a lead engineer. And from my perspective, they'd probably also be getting equity as a lead engineer. But yeah, whoever wants to hop in on this, feel free.
I think it depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for someone who can actually vet the code and is more interested in doing that longer term versus somebody who's more looking at the vision for the longer term architecture and, where partnering with the CEO and the CFO and all those other folks in the C-suite. That's just sort of my impression.
The only thing I would add is, are you hiring for now or are you hiring for growth? Right. So if you were hiring for now, a lead engineer might be the right fit. But if you're hiring for someone who either is a partner with you and the board, and as you grow and can really think through growing an organization, then a CTO might be the better choice.
Gotcha.
You could also maybe get the best of both worlds by hiring a technical advisor and then getting the lead engineer, because the technical advisor should be, kind of skilled enough to give you kind of free CTO advice. Free CTO advice. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool. Yeah, well, I think that's about the time that we have for this panel. But thank you all for providing your time and advice. This is a super valuable panel, and I'm sure the audience learned a ton. We had about like 100 people, 85 to 100 people kind of flowing through. So, and the beauty of taking a poll is we actually know probably about half those people are actually founders, 20%, 22% non-technical, and about 20% technical. So a lot of people here are probably trying to build teams, probably trying to build engineering teams, and I think they got a lot of valuable advice today. So thanks, guys, once again. You can switch to backstage, and we can head out. But thank you. And for the audience, don't forget we have tons more panels the rest of this week. We have 2 more software-related panels coming up later today, so please feel free to hop in there. We'll